Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be presenting some of the early results from the Creative Flow and Wellbeing study, and I'll be doing that in part one. I'll also make a part two, which is presenting the new advanced version of this study, which we've just publicly launched. And if at any point you would like to participate in these studies, they are ongoing, and you can do so by going to creativeempirical.com or just scanning the QR code in the bottom left corner of every slide. Um, so my name's Oliver Durcan. I'm a PhD candidate and associate lecturer at Goldsmiths University of London in the Department of Psychology. And I specialize in looking at understanding what's happening in creatives when they're in flow states. So looking at what I call creative flow states. And I'll explain about what that is in a minute. Before I was doing this, I was actually very active in the visual arts world. I curated exhibitions with over 100 artists, and I also exhibited my own paintings and installations in various galleries across Europe. And that was after being raised by two professional musicians. So I have had a fair bit of exposure to various creative endeavors and some of the different psychological demands underlying those endeavors. And I guess when I started doing research into this from a psychological perspective, um, I realized that there was this accessibility gap between the creatives themselves and the research about those creatives or about those psychological processes that creatives are adopting regularly. So I started a platform called Creative Empirical, and the aim of this is really to increase the understanding of creativity psychology amongst creative practitioners. And we do this through in-person events. We also do this through publishing academic literature, and we also do this by providing information about participant responses to our research back to them in a way which is palatable. And I'll talk about that in part two because we'll be announcing some new ways that we're making these results palatable. So, onwards with the presentation. You might be wondering why there is a sort of James Blake tweet here. Um, Making your best art alleviates depression for about 12 hours. So, James Blake, for anyone that doesn't know, is a famous musician. He actually graduated from Goldsmiths. And he's become a bit of a superstar now. But in 2019, he wrote this quote. He was really starting to speak a lot more openly about his mental health. This was kind of like a period where people were starting to do that, sort of pre-lockdown. It was still, wouldn't say taboo, but it certainly wasn't as open as it is now. And yeah, this tweet really stuck with me because I experienced an increase in my well-being, or I felt fantastic as well after having made my best work. But really, this hits a nail on the head as to what we're trying to answer or what we're trying to explore in the creative flow and well-being study. So I'll get started and explain what I mean by that. So James Blake kind of frames this link between creative engagement and well-being, specifically that creative engagement leads to an increase in well-being. But the question I have as a psychologist is why is that happening? Or more directly, what's happening during this creative engagement that's leading to an increase in something that is kind of separate to that. So day-to-day well-being and engagement in a creative activity, that they obviously are from the same person, but if you can have positive effects on well-being outside of that creative discipline, then there's obviously quite a lot happening there. And I guess the proposal made here in this study, or the assumptions that this study relies on, is that the experience of flow during creative engagement is responsible for this. So flow is this psychological state which is somewhere between boredom and anxiety. So you'd usually achieve it by creating a balance between your skills and the challenges that you face. So it's not too easy and not too hard. And it's also a highly motivational state. So you need to care about what you're doing. It's not something that can happen in any sort of arbitrary, challenging activity. It's sort of the opposite of apathy as well in that respect. So you may be able to think of instances yourself where you experienced this setup um, doing something you love that's challenging enough to push yourself not beyond your limit, but to almost to your limit. And these are the sort of prime conditions for flow states to arise. And the characteristics of the experience, well, there are three main characteristics that we use at the lab in Goldsmiths. The first is that the task is highly absorbing, so your focus increases, and thinking styles that include evaluating what's happening or monitoring or checking, they seem to decrease. So you're just working on it without really thinking. And action fluency is the second component. And this really encapsulates the sequence of actions and the sequence of thoughts that are involved in whatever you're doing seem to feel more spontaneous and more intuitive, and I guess smoother. And the amount of effort that you need to put in order to meet the demands actually decreases. So all of this stuff's happening, but it becomes easier. Some have described this as feeling like effortless control. So your control increases, but at less effort. And together, these three components, or these two components, make the third, which is enjoyment. It's incredibly rewarding to experience flow. And this may have something to do with why you feel so good afterwards. The evolutionary hypothesis of flow, I guess, aligns with this as well, right? So, the evolutionary hypothesis of flow proposes that flow evolved in the human species to motivate and reward us when we develop skills. So, if we think about various behaviors or actions that we do where we just feel this natural reward, I don't know, eating sugary foods, social media use, I don't know if it's actually good all the time, but certainly we can feel quite good when we experience social connection. Flow is considered to be, one of those natural rewards, but really the action that is happening during flow is skill development. So you're advancing, you're pushing beyond your limit because you're so engulfed in what you're doing that you're starting to improve in it. And this natural reward that comes from that is proposed to have been adaptive for our species to survive and to grow and to continue to where we are today. And this also may relate to James Blake's alleviation of depression. This may be flow may be a natural way to maintain well-being, which really, I guess, highlights why it is important to think about, conducting research to understand how we can operationalize it is important. And it potentially is a natural as opposed to a medicated way to maintain our mental health and well-being. So onwards with the actual study. This study started in January 2025, 2024, and it will be running until around April 2025. It's conducted by myself, Zala Kodrick, Dr. George Musgrave, Professor Joydeep Bhattacharya, and Dr. Peter Holland. We're all Goldsmiths researchers. And it really rests on the assumption that flow states that occur during creative engagement lead to an increase in well-being, or what I call is creative flow, so flow that is occurring during creative engagement. And the way that we're testing this is to ask creative practitioners about their past 6 months' experiences of experiencing flow during their creative activity and their general day-to-day well-being. And this is a 10-15 minute online survey. It's nice and quick. We've had about 238 valid responses, and mostly they're from musicians and painters. And over the next few months, we'll be running some campaigns to diversify this population, to increase it beyond just musicians and painters, so we can make more generalizable statements about creative flow. And I'm going to present two results that we found so far. I can't present everything because this is an ongoing study, and I don't want to bias anyone's response if you take part. But um, the first thing we found is that, yeah, when people report lower rates of creative flow, or ratings of creative flow, they also report lower ratings of well-being in their day-to-day life. And the same goes for when they report higher ratings on both of these variables as well. So this really, I guess, covers the basics. We know that creative flow correlates with well-being. But the second result that we found was slightly unexpected. We found that the driver of the driver of increased well-being was not actually in task absorption or enjoyment, which are two components of flow. They were in action fluency, which is this feeling of spontaneous, intuitive, and effortless control in your thoughts and your actions. And I guess what this means is that even if participants are highly absorbed and are experiencing a high amount of enjoyment, you're not going to get an increase in well-being unless action fluency is also high. Okay, so this really seems to be the driving factor behind the increase in well-being. And this comes back to the evolutionary hypothesis here, right? If you're performing fluently, you're exercising and probably evolving your skills, you're growing your skills. And the hypothesis would suggest that you deserve, or you are provided with a natural reward and a natural incentive to continue doing this. Um, and it also goes back to James Blake's experience of feeling this buffer to depression after having actioned those skills, right? Having performed really well after having made your best art. Um, so this is a really interesting set of results that supports this hypothesis here. But unfortunately, as with a lot of research, we can't answer everything with this study, and there's some things that this study can't tell us, or these results can't tell us. The first one is due to the correlational design. We don't know whether creative flow is causing high well-being, or whether actually people that already have high well-being are able to get into creative flow states, right? So that's one thing we can't answer for sure. We also can't answer whether what's happening in individual flow experiences. We're asking people to give us a general average of the past 6 months of these variables. Um, so we don't know whether it's one flow experience that's causing a prolonged experience of well-being, or whether you need several positive or strong flow experiences to experience this increase. And also, we don't know what's causing creative flow. So we didn't ask those questions in this survey. Um, and I guess all of these things that these results can't tell us have been addressed in a new advanced version of this study so we can make these inferences. So where the previous version that I've just covered talks about the past 6 months experiences of creative flow and well-being, the new version asks these questions plus a few more daily for 2 weeks. So I'm going to end part one now. If you're interested to find out more about the advanced version, which follows this format, this daily for 2 weeks format, then watch part two. And if you haven't taken part in the version I've just explained, the first version, do scan the QR code. It takes about 10-15 minutes. It's very easy to do on mobile. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully in part two.